When my son got married, I kept the ultimate secret. I never told him that I had inherited my late wife's $26 million ranch. And thank God I stayed silent, because exactly 1 week after I paid for their lavish wedding, my brand new daughter-in-law marched into my living room with a notary and a piece of paper, designed to leave me completely homeless. But her arrogant smirk vanished the moment she discovered that the very document she was trying to force down my throat was actually her own financial death warrant. Before I tell you exactly how I let them destroy themselves, tell me in the comments where you are watching from. Hit like and subscribe if you believe ungrateful family members always get the karma they deserve. One honest note before we begin. This story is a work of fiction. The voice you are hearing and the images you are seeing are AI-assisted. Names, places, and events are invented for storytelling. Any resemblance to real people is purely coincidental. But the lessons about family, greed, and quiet strength are very real. Now, let us begin. My name is Elias Croft. I am 71 years old, and I spent 40 years as an iron worker and welder, coming home every night with steel dust in my hair and an ache in my back, all to give my family a stable life. I am a simple man. I drive an old truck, I wear flannel shirts, I live quietly. To my daughter-in-law, Sabrina, I was just a broke, washed-up welder taking up space. She had no idea about the true state of my finances. She did not know that my late wife, Nora, came from a very old, very wealthy ranching family. Nora and I lived simply by choice, not by necessity. But Sabrina only ever saw the surface. And just 7 days ago, I had paid $140,000 in cold, hard cash to fund the extravagant wine country wedding that Sabrina absolutely demanded. She wanted a fairy tale. Ice sculptures, imported flowers, a live band, a custom designer gown. I paid for all of it without a single complaint because my son Colton begged me to. He said it would make her happy. He said it would start their marriage on the right foot. And now, 7 days later, she was standing in my living room, demanding I sign away the roof over my head. "Elias," Sabrina said, her voice dripping with fake concern. "Colton and I have been talking. We are just so worried about you living here all alone. Your health is not what it used to be, and this house is too much work for you." I kept my face completely blank. "My health is perfectly fine, Sabrina. I take a walk every morning. I cook my own meals." She waved her hand dismissively, as if my words were the babbling of a confused child. "Well, you know how quickly things change at your age," she said. "One day you are fine. The next day you fall down the stairs. Colton and I have decided we need to start managing your assets for you. It is the responsible thing to do. We found a lovely assisted living facility outside the city, very affordable. But before we move you in, we just need to transfer the deed of this house into our names. That way we can sell it and use the funds to cover your care, and whatever is left over, we can invest for our future family." I felt the air leave my lungs. She was standing in the home I had shared with Nora for 40 years, telling me she was going to lock me in a facility and take the profits from my house to fund her own luxury. I want you to understand exactly how she said it. She did not say it nervously or apologetically, the way a person might when they know they are doing something shameful. She said it the way you read a shopping list. She did not once call me Dad or even soften her voice. She looked at the framed photographs of Nora on the mantel, the woman whose family had built a fortune over 4 generations, and she saw nothing but clutter to be boxed up and donated. She had decided, somewhere in her calculations, that I was already gone, that the only thing standing between her and a fortune was a signature from a confused old man who did not matter. And that, more than anything, told me exactly what she was. Because a person reveals their whole character in how they treat someone they believe is powerless. I slowly shifted my gaze toward the hallway. Colton stood there in a sharp business casual outfit, holding an artisan coffee he had bought on the way over. He was my son. The boy I taught to ride a bike, the boy whose college tuition I paid in full by working double shifts at the yard. And he would not make eye contact with me. He stared intensely at his phone, scrolling, pretending he was somehow separate from the cruelty happening in front of him. "Colton," I said, my voice low and heavy. "Are you hearing this? Are you a part of this?" He shifted his weight, glanced up, and let his eyes dart away to the floorboards. "Dad, come on, be reasonable," he mumbled. "Sabrina is right. You are getting older. It is just a piece of paper. It makes things easier for everyone." Easier for them. That was what he meant. I stood there and I looked at my son and I tried to find the boy I had raised. When Colton was 9, he broke his arm falling out of the big oak in the backyard, and he was so brave about it that the doctor gave him a lollipop and called him tough. I had carried him to the truck that day. I had sat up all night beside his bed. I had worked double shifts in the freezing yard for 30 years so that he would never know the kind of hunger I had known as a boy. And somewhere along the way, all of that had been quietly replaced. The man leaning against my doorframe, refusing to look at me, was a stranger wearing my son's face. He had let a woman he had known for 2 years teach him to see his own father as an expense to be managed. That was the deepest wound of all, deeper than the house, deeper than the ranch. The notary shifted his weight from foot to foot, clearly realizing he had walked into the middle of an ugly family betrayal. He cleared his throat. "Sir, I just need to verify your identification and witness your signature on the lines with the red tabs." Sabrina tapped her manicured nail against the paper. "Just sign it, Elias. We have errands to run, and the notary charges by the hour. You cannot take care of yourself anymore. We are doing you a favor." I looked at the gold pen. I looked at the document that would strip me of my home, and a deep, burning anger began to ignite in my stomach. But I knew that exploding in rage would only hand Sabrina the exact ammunition she needed, the proof that I was unstable, confused, unfit. So I took a slow breath, and I let my fingers tremble over the pen. As my hand hovered there, a lifetime flooded through me. I remembered the day Nora and I first saw this house. It was a run-down wreck with a sagging porch and a dead lawn, and she stood in the empty living room, turned in a slow circle, and told me it was perfect. We spent a year fixing it with our own hands. I sanded these floors on my knees. She painted every wall twice because she could never decide on a color. She planted the roses out back the same week we learned we were expecting Colton. Every board in this house holds a piece of her. And now, a stranger who had entered our lives 18 months ago was standing on Nora's floor with a gold pen, waiting for me to sign it all away so she could turn it into cash. Sabrina did not see a home. She saw square footage and market value. To sign that paper would have been to spit on my wife's grave. "You are going to pick up that pen and sign the quitclaim deed right now," Colton said, stepping forward, his voice dropping into a hard, commanding register I had never heard from him before. "If you cooperate, you get a nice bed at the facility. But if you refuse, I will personally call the police. I will tell them a confused, aggressive old man is trespassing and refusing to leave. I will tell them you have severe dementia and you are a danger to yourself and to my wife. They will remove you and place you in a state psychiatric ward for evaluation. Once you are in the system as a mentally incompetent ward of the state, taking control of your assets becomes very easy." The sheer ruthlessness of it was staggering. He had thought of everything, So I did the only smart thing. I let my shoulders collapse. I made my breathing shallow and panicked, and I whispered that I needed a moment, just a moment, to gather myself in the other room. I shuffled down the hall to my bedroom, closed the door, and locked it. And the instant that lock clicked, the trembling old man vanished. I walked to Nora's photograph on the dresser, and I smiled at her, because what those two vultures in my living room did not know was the enormous secret my wife and I had kept for years. 3 years ago, when Nora first felt her health slipping, she saw exactly what her son was becoming, a man obsessed with a flashy, expensive life. To protect her family's legacy from Colton and from any spouse he might marry, she bypassed the ordinary inheritance entirely. She signed the crown jewel of her family, a 2,000-acre coastal ranch of old redwood and open pasture in Mendocino County, California, free and clear of any mortgage into my name alone. Land that billionaires were circling like sharks. Land worth, at that time, $26 million. It belonged entirely to the clueless welder standing in that locked bedroom. I pulled out my phone and dialed my trust attorney, Nathaniel Poole. "Nathaniel," I said, and my voice was no longer weak. It was steady, smooth, and cold. "It is happening. Exactly the way Nora warned me it might. Sabrina is downstairs with a notary and a quitclaim deed. Colton is threatening to have me committed." I told him what I had never told anyone, how I had known this ambush was coming. At the wedding, 7 days earlier, I had stepped away from the noise to find a quiet corner near the back hallway, and I heard Sabrina's heels clicking on the marble. She was pacing, whispering into her phone, and she was not talking to a friend. She was negotiating with a commercial real estate broker who worked the wealthy western states. I pressed my back to the wall in the shadows and listened to her map out a nightmare. She told the broker they just needed a few more weeks to finalize the paperwork on the clueless old man. Those were her exact words. She explained how they would manipulate me into signing away my house under the guise of an early inheritance. Then she would place me in a cheap, underfunded state facility so I could never interfere again. And then she told him the truly monstrous part. She knew about the ranch in California. She assumed it would simply pass to Colton once they had me declared incompetent, and she ordered that broker to begin drawing up liquidation contracts. She wanted to sell my dead wife's sacred generational land to the highest corporate bidder the moment they seized control of my estate, and use the profits to fund some luxury tech startup she had been dreaming about. She described destroying my entire life with the casual tone of a woman ordering coffee. I stood frozen in that dim hallway in my rented suit, the muffled sound of the band and the laughter and the clinking glasses drifting through the mahogany doors, and I felt my heart physically ache in my chest. Part of me, the part that was still just a father, desperately wanted to believe this was Sabrina alone. I prayed that my son knew nothing of it, that he was inside that ballroom somewhere, innocent, that I could still pull him aside and warn him about the woman he had just married. I held on to that hope for about 30 more seconds. That was all it took for it to die. And then the men's room door opened, and Colton stepped out, adjusting his tuxedo. He walked over, wrapped his arm around her waist, and she happily told him the broker was ready to sell the California property the moment they had my signature. My son did not gasp. He did not reprimand her for plotting to lock his grieving father in an institution. He smiled down at her, kissed her forehead, and told her the plan was flawless. He said they just had to play the loving children a little longer until the ink was dry. That was the moment the father inside me quietly died. When I finished telling Nathaniel the story, he was silent for a long moment. Then his voice came back, carrying the full weight of legal certainty. "Elias," he said slowly, "let them plot. Let them scheme. Your assets are ironclad and completely impenetrable. Neither of them can ever legally touch a single blade of grass in Mendocino. They are hunting a ghost." I thanked him, and I gave him his instructions. I told him to prepare the defensive filings, but to sit on them and to wait for my signal, no matter what he saw. Then I walked back downstairs into the living room. But I did not sign the deed. I looked Sabrina in the eye, my voice suddenly calm and clear, and I told her I would not fight them. I told her they were right, that I was tired, that I could not manage this big house anymore, and that I would move out quietly by the end of the week, if they would just give me a little dignity. I let them believe I had surrendered. Sabrina's smile returned, wide and victorious. Colton relaxed. They thought they had won the war in a single afternoon. They had no idea they had only won the bait. Over the next 2 days, I moved out. I packed a few bags, took Nora's photograph and her jewelry, and I rented a small, furnished apartment across town under a name they would never think to check. But before I handed over the keys, I did one quiet piece of work. I had spent 40 years around machinery and wiring, and installing a few small motion-activated cameras in a house takes a welder about 20 minutes. I placed them where a person plots, in the dining room and the study. Tiny lenses tucked into a bookshelf and a smoke detector, feeding a live signal straight to my laptop. Then I gave my son the keys to the home his mother and I had built, thanked him for taking care of me, and let him believe he was watching a defeated old man shuffle off to die. And I went back to my apartment, poured myself a glass of water, and I waited for the show to begin. It did not take long. 2 nights later, I sat in the dark with my laptop open, and I watched my son and my daughter-in-law and a nervous man in a cheap gray suit gather around my dining room table. I watched Colton practice tracing my signature on a scrap of paper for 20 minutes, mimicking my slant and my heavy pressure, laughing about how easy it was to steal a man's whole identity. When he was confident, he forged my name at the bottom of a document, and the corrupt notary pressed his official stamp into the paper, sealing their crime with the illusion of authority. But it was not the quitclaim deed for the house. It was something far more ambitious. It was a general durable power of attorney, the master key to everything I owned. Sabrina could not contain herself. She stood up and paced the room, clapping her hands, and she finally laid out the true masterstroke of her scheme. She told them they would not waste time with slow commercial banks, with their background checks and their weeks of underwriting. She had already contacted an aggressive private hard money lender, the kind that does not care about credit scores, the kind that only cares about one thing: massive, undeniable collateral. They were going to use the forged power of attorney to pledge my $26 million ranch as collateral for an immediate, high-interest loan. Colton asked her how much. Sabrina smiled a wide, predatory grin. $6 million, she whispered. Enough for the sports cars, the first-class flights, the luxury startup. The lender would place a lien on the ranch, and because they believed I was a senile old fool, they assumed I would simply default on the payments. When I defaulted, the lender would seize the ranch and liquidate it, and they would be sitting on a beach with $6 million in cash. I sat alone in the dark of my little rented apartment and watched all of it unfold on my laptop screen. And the strangest thing happened. My hands went perfectly still. I thought about the redwoods on that ranch, some of them 1,000 years old, trees that were already ancient when my wife's great-grandparents first drove cattle across that valley. I thought about Nora walking me through those trees on our first anniversary, pressing my rough welder's palm against the bark and telling me that some things are meant to outlast the people who love them. And I looked at my son on the screen, kissing a forged piece of paper, planning to grind all of it into gravel for a beach house and a startup. Whatever thread still connected me to him did not snap in anger. It simply dissolved, quietly and completely, the way rust finally lets go of steel. What was left in its place was not grief. It was purpose. I watched Colton pick up that forged document and kiss it, holding it up to the light like a sacred relic. I watched him pull Sabrina into a tight embrace and whisper that their days of living on a budget were finally over. And I felt not 1 ounce of panic. I did not reach for my phone to warn them or to stop them from walking off the cliff. The betrayal had hardened into a cold, solid wall of resolve. They had willingly chosen to cross the line from disrespectful children into federal criminals. They had just manufactured, with their own hands, the exact rope they needed to hang themselves. I took a slow sip of water and let a deep, patient satisfaction settle into my chest. The trap was set. All I had to do now was wait for it to snap shut. The very next morning, Nathaniel called, his voice tight with urgency. "Elias, they actually did it. The audacity of these two is hard to comprehend." His monitoring software had flagged it. The predatory lender had already pulled the title report on the ranch and filed a binding lien against the estate. They had accepted the forged power of attorney as fact, because a private lender who thrives on fast, high-interest money does not bother with the careful underwriting a real bank requires. They saw a pristine $26 million ranch, and their greed matched Sabrina's perfectly. "Elias, we can end this right now," Nathaniel said, shifting into his aggressive mode. "I have an emergency injunction drafted. If I file it this second, we freeze the whole transaction before a dollar moves. We alert the FBI. They have committed wire fraud, identity theft, and real estate fraud. We can have agents at their door before sunset, and your land stays untouched." It was tempting. I could end the nightmare that very afternoon. I could send agents to drag my son out in handcuffs before he had spent a single stolen dollar. But I told Nathaniel to hold. "Do not file yet," I said. "If we stop them now, they will claim it was all a misunderstanding, a family dispute over estate planning. A clever lawyer will muddy it for years. I do not want them stopped before the crime. I want them buried inside it. Let the money move. Let them believe they have won completely. Let them get comfortable enough to do something truly stupid in public. Then we file, and we do it in front of an audience they cannot talk their way out of." Nathaniel was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "Understood." And I heard something like respect in his voice. And so we waited, and we watched, and we let them dig. For 3 weeks, they dug beautifully. The $6 million hit their account, and Sabrina spent it like water. New cars, a leased penthouse, deposits on a luxury development. Because in her mind, the ranch was already hers to bulldoze. She was not even discreet about it. She flaunted every dollar across her social media. The champagne, the shopping bags, the interior designer walking through their new penthouse, captioning it all as the reward for hard work and good instincts. Colton posted a photograph of himself standing on the ranch land, at the base of a redwood he was already planning to cut down, calling it the future. I saved every one of those posts. Each careless brag was another timestamp, another admission, another brick in the wall Nathaniel was quietly building around them. They believed they were celebrating. They were actually confessing, in public, one photograph at a time. And the beautiful thing about a person who is certain they have already won is that they stop looking behind them. They never once wondered why the clueless old welder had folded so easily, or where he had gone, or what he might be watching. And on a cold, clear Thursday morning, they made their final, fatal mistake. They drove up to the ranch in Mendocino with a convoy of luxury vehicles, a crowd of wealthy investors, and a full construction crew with flatbed trucks and yellow bulldozers, ready to break ground on the luxury resort Sabrina had been dreaming about. They stood on my late wife's land, on the sacred generational ground Nora had entrusted to me, and they prepared to tear the redwoods down. They had brought their investors to witness their triumph. Instead, they had gathered every last one of them in exactly the right place, at exactly the right time, for the trap to close. I had arrived the night before, driven up alone in my old truck, and slept one last night in the little ranch cabin where Nora was born. In the morning, I made a pot of coffee, carried a mug out to the porch, and simply sat in the rocking chair to wait. I heard them long before I saw them. The low growl of luxury engines climbing the gravel road, the diesel rumble of the flatbeds hauling the bulldozers. When the convoy crested the rise and rolled into the clearing in front of the main cabin, I did not stand. I did not wave. I just rocked slowly and watched them pour out of their cars in their expensive clothes, pointing at trees, already dividing the land with their hands. And then Sabrina's eyes found the old welder sitting calmly on the porch of a ranch she had been told he knew nothing about. And every ounce of color drained out of her face. Nathaniel Poole was standing beside me holding a leather briefcase. Nathaniel stepped forward and raised his voice across the property. "I am Nathaniel Poole, legal counsel for the sole owner of this estate, Mr. Elias Croft. I hold a binding federal court order signed less than 24 hours ago. It officially nullifies any and all claims to this land made by anyone other than my client." He fixed his gaze on Sabrina. "The paper you are clutching is not a valid instrument. It is a clumsy forgery, born from an arrogant and highly illegal conspiracy." Then he turned to the crowd of investors and made sure they understood the liability they had almost stepped into. "The document these two presented to you was originally a short-term medical proxy," Nathaniel announced. "We have high-definition video and audio proving that Colton Croft and his wife altered that expired document in a dining room, forged my client's signature, and manufactured a fraudulent durable power of attorney. They committed federal wire fraud, aggravated identity theft, and monumental real estate fraud." The air on that ranch froze solid. The investors stared at Colton and Sabrina with dawning horror, realizing they had been courted by two desperate criminals. And that was when the county sheriff stepped off my porch, walked straight past my son and daughter-in-law without a glance, and arrested the corrupt notary who had foolishly traveled along hoping for another cash payout. The metallic ratchet of the handcuffs echoed across the valley. The investors bolted for their cars, dialing their own attorneys, wanting nothing to do with a federally entangled fraud. The construction crew threw their trucks into reverse and fled. The county sheriff who had made the arrest walked the sobbing notary to a waiting patrol car, reciting the Miranda warning in a flat, practiced voice, and the heavy door slammed shut on the man who had stamped his career away for 2 envelopes of cash. Watching their hired accomplice hauled off in handcuffs sent a violent shock through Colton. His breathing went shallow and ragged. He clutched at his chest, and his knees buckled, forcing him to lean on the hood of a rented luxury car just to stay upright. The confident businessman facade he had worn for the investors dissolved in seconds, leaving behind a terrified man watching his entire fabricated life collapse in real time. The cars, the clothes, the status, all of it had been built on a rotten foundation of forgery. and now the whole structure was coming down on top of him. I had spent 40 years watching bad welds fail under load. They always go the same way. Slowly, and then all at once. But Sabrina refused to surrender. Her entitlement blinded her to the reality collapsing around her. She marched up to Nathaniel and jabbed a shaking finger at his chest. "You think a court order about a forged signature changes anything? We secured a $6 million mortgage against this property 3 weeks ago. The funds are already dispersed. We used this land as collateral." She spun to face me, her chest heaving, a wicked, delusional triumph twisting back onto her lips. "We owe a ruthless private lender $6 million, Elias, and they placed a binding lien on this estate. If you try to stop us, we default, and the lender seizes the land and evicts you. You are trapped, old man. Either way, we win." She stood there panting, certain that her mountain of debt was an unbreakable shield. I set my coffee mug down on the little table beside the rocking chair, and I stood up slowly, the porch boards groaning under my boots. I walked past her flailing arms and stopped inches in front of my son. Colton was slumped against a car, his face a portrait of pure panic. I looked him dead in the eye, searching for the little boy I had once loved so much, and I found nothing but the hollow gaze of a cornered thief. "You really thought you had outsmarted everyone," I said, my voice eerily calm against the silence of the mountains. "You thought stealing $6 million with a forged document was a brilliant strategy. But you forgot one thing about your mother. She was always 10 steps ahead of you. 2 years ago, long before she grew ill, Nora and I sat down with Nathaniel because we knew the developers would eventually come for this place. So we made a permanent, irrevocable decision. We placed all 2,000 acres into a strictly protected federal conservation easement." I let the words hang in the freezing morning air, and I watched the last of the fleeing investors stiffen, because they understood the catastrophic weight of it, even if my son and his wife did not. "I do not care about your stupid environmental paperwork," Sabrina spat. "A lien is a lien. The bank owns this land." Nathaniel adjusted his glasses and looked at her with genuine, professional pity. "You are remarkably ignorant of federal property law," he said smoothly. "A conservation easement permanently strips all commercial development rights from this land, in perpetuity. It cannot be subdivided, it cannot be developed, and it absolutely cannot be pledged as collateral for a commercial mortgage by anyone, ever. The loan you secured is void, not only because you forged the power of attorney, but because the asset you pledged does not legally exist in the commercial market. You borrowed $6 million against a thing that cannot be sold." Sabrina's jaw dropped, and the fraudulent documents slipped from her trembling fingers into the dirt. But the nightmare was not over. I took one step closer to my son. "You did not borrow from a regulated bank," I reminded him, my voice merciless. "You went to a predatory hard money lender to skip the background checks. And men like that do not care about your excuses. They only care about recovering their capital by any means necessary." Nathaniel pulled a final document from his briefcase and handed it to Colton. "Because the collateral is legally void," he said, "the lender has already triggered the acceleration clause in your loan agreement. They are demanding immediate repayment of the entire $6 million, plus penalties and legal fees. And because you signed those loan documents personally, they are coming after your actual assets to satisfy the debt. As of this morning, they have begun seizure protocols on everything you truly own. They are foreclosing on your penthouse. They are repossessing your cars. They have frozen your accounts. Everything is gone." The crushing weight of total ruin finally broke my son. His legs gave out, and he fell to his knees in the cold Mendocino dirt, sobbing like a frightened child.
"Dad, please,"
he begged, grabbing at my worn jeans.
"Please save me. I am going to prison. I owe $6 million. I will do anything. Please fix this."
I looked down at the weeping man at my feet, and beside him, Sabrina finally understood that she was shackled to a bankrupt felon buried in debt. She let out a scream of pure fury. "I want a divorce," she shrieked, backing away from her sobbing husband as though his ruin were contagious. The alliance they had built to destroy me tore itself apart in the dirt in less than a minute, each of them clawing to escape the wreckage they had made together. I felt no joy watching it. I felt only the solemn, heavy calm of a man who had finally set down a weight he had carried for far too long. I did not save him. Colton took a plea and is serving his sentence in a federal facility. And when he is released, a lifetime of debt to men who do not forgive will be waiting for him. Sabrina got her divorce and a fraud investigation of her own, and the luxury world she clawed for is gone forever. They are both learning, the hard and permanent way, the exact value of an honest dollar. Colton lives in a cramped studio now, working a minimum wage job, answering to a manager half his age, sending me letters I read but never answer. Sabrina vanished the way people like her always do, moving on to hunt for the next comfortable life, though the fraud investigation follows her like a shadow, and the wealthy friends who once filled her photographs no longer return her calls. The predatory lender got its judgment, and it will be collecting from the two of them for the rest of their natural lives. Not a single dollar of it will ever touch my wife's land. And the corrupt notary who stamped his name onto their forgery lost his license, his freedom, and any illusion that a quick payout is ever really quick. People might call me cruel for letting my own flesh and blood fall to the bottom. But at 71, after a lifetime of hard work and hard betrayals, I have learned one undeniable truth. Parental love was never meant to be a bulletproof vest for a child's greed. If you keep shielding them from the consequences of their crimes, you are not saving them. You are only teaching them to become better, more efficient monsters. Sometimes, the only love left to give is to step aside and let life hit them at full force. I did not sleep well for a long time after that morning. I would like to tell you that I felt triumphant, that watching my son fall to his knees in the dirt gave me some clean satisfaction. It did not. It was the heaviest thing I have ever carried. For weeks, I asked myself if I could have done it differently, if I could have sat him down years earlier, if I had spoiled him or shielded him or failed him in some way I could not see. But every time I came back to the same hard truth. If I had rescued him, if I had quietly paid off that $6 million debt and made the charges disappear, I would not have saved my son. I would have taught him that a man can forge his own father's name, plot to lock him in an institution, and try to sell his dead mother's land, and suffer nothing for it. I would have handed him permission to do it again to someone weaker. Real love, the kind that can actually save a rotting soul, sometimes means letting the fall happen, so that whatever gets up afterward has a chance to be honest. The ranch still stands, every redwood untouched, protected forever by the easement Nora had the wisdom to sign. And I finally opened it to the world, in her name. Today, it is a free wilderness camp where children who have never seen a forest or a river or a clear night sky come to spend a week among the trees my wife loved. This is a work of fiction, and the voice you have been listening to is not a living man. But the lesson beneath it is as real as steel. I spent 50 years welding steel, and I know exactly how much pressure a weak joint can take before it fails. My son forgot that a signature can be forged, but a legacy cannot. They wanted my inheritance. In the end, the only thing they inherited was the ruin they earned with their own hands. My name is Elias Croft, and the land they tried to steal, I gave to the world in my wife's name.